time now to double down on those constitutional amendments. The bills have stacked up, 81 of them. The first 39 made the headlines, but of course the House of Representatives is doubling down on some of the changes it wants to make to the 1999 Constitution as amended. What are some of these bills talking about? How realistic is it for the National Assembly to get it through when it comes to delivering some of those amendments that are long overdue? And what are some of those telltale signs that a bill or an amendment of that gravity of some of those amendments could actually scale through? We'll also look at the trajectory of the National Assembly handling constitutional reviews over the past few decades, how successful they are or how unsuccessful some of them turn out to be. These conversations have continued to elicit a lot of reactions, some sort of controversy around some of the ideas, including the one we just talked about, one-day general elections in Nigeria. You can see how divided the people are on this one. So let's bring in an expert who can speak to some of the developments in the National Assembly. We have with us in the studio Barrister Bulus Asten, a legal practitioner, a fellow of the Security Institute and past chairman, Nigerian Bar Association of the Abuja chapter. Good morning to you, Barrister, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Abdullahi.
Well, speak to me as an ordinary Nigerian. How excited are you about these bills? Some of them, you must have familiarized yourself with some of the bills so far.
Certainly.
What excites you about them?
So generally, Nigerians have been clamoring for quite a number of reforms, ranging from constitutional, electoral, judicial, and a wide range of issues. And it would appear that for quite some time, the National Assembly has bothered itself with issues that most Nigerians don't necessarily align with, right? But looking at the number of issues that this proposed amendments border on, it would seem like they are now touching the areas that have been itching Nigerians, and that would account for the increased interest. I believe you would have noticed quite a number of people want to have a bite on the issues. So they're touching the right places now.
And you look at the structure of the constitutional review itself. They're talking about a variety of things, right? Governance, judicial, justice administration. They're talking about immunity. They're talking about state creation, for instance.
Yes.
On the whole, what do you make of the amendment processes? Because just trying to get the tax reform bills passed, for instance, amendments to laws that we've had since the 70s and the 60s, for instance, have proven to be very difficult to expunge or to amend. How easy or difficult is the amendment process when it comes to our Constitution?
Yeah, so constitutional amendment in Nigeria is it's quite rigid. It has been made stringent for a purpose, so that some people will not just wake up one morning and just change it to suit their preference or whatever it is. In the context of the ongoing amendments, or rather you talked about something like the tax reform bill or other tax reform. No, not tax reform. It's now an act.
Yeah.
It's now an act, Finance Act.
Well, I think the president hasn't signed it yet, so it's still in the process.
No, it's an act. It's an act in operation. It was signed by President Buhari.
No, you're talking about the Financial Act. I'm talking about the current tax reform bills.
Okay.
The 4 bills that are still being considered.
Pending.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so the issue generally with what we have on ground is that for there are certain bills that can be dealt with from the National Assembly, the presidency, back and forth until it becomes law. But for the Constitution, the process, as I said, is a bit more stringent. It can start from the National Assembly. From the National Assembly, it goes to the state assemblies.
Right.
But before it even goes to the state assembly, it has to be thrashed at the National Assembly. For example, in this case, they've done the first reading. the second reading, committees and all that. They will tidy up the nitty-gritties. The ones that are to be retained will be retained. The ones that are to be expunged will be expunged. After they're done at that level, it goes to the state assemblies, which will conduct some sort of a referendum. At the end of the day, 2/3 of the members of the state assemblies must vote in favor of each particular amendment. And 2/3 of the state assemblies in Nigeria must assent to it.
Is that for every provision, or are there no federal laws that would just stay at the federal level? Say, for instance,
for the Constitution, it has to follow that process. But for other laws, there are federal laws and there are state laws. For federal laws, they start and end it's between the National Assembly and the presidency, while the state laws is between the governor and the state assemblies, the governors and state assemblies.
And in talking about one or some of the few ones that stick out, right? They are considering removing immunity for the vice president, the governors, and the deputy governors. And these are some things that have been constitutionally guaranteed so far. How Herculean is this task for them? Because I reckon for the House of Representatives, most of them have never been governors before. In the Senate, I reckon they're going to have a different idea around it.
Because some of them were governors.
Exactly, and they knew what that protection provided for them during their stay in office. Considering what the framers of our Constitution put into the idea of immunity, how difficult of a pill will this be to swallow for Nigerians? And what do you think is in the mind of the representatives when they're saying it? They're talking about promoting accountability in public office, and they think stripping the executive with the immunity that they currently enjoy, with the exception of the president, by the way, is the way forward.
So I also think that quite a number of Nigerians, from the feelers that I've got, are of the view that not just the governors, the vice president, or the deputy governors, including the president, should be stripped of immunity because it shields them from being accountable to Nigerians. Even after leaving office, it's difficult for them to be prosecuted. Taking, for example, the case of Yahaya Bello as a case study. But so at the end of the day, what they are proposing will simply create a supreme leader in the president who can do and undo and create more like a puppets in the governors and vice president and deputy governors. So if we are proposing that immunity, they should be stripped of immunity, it should be an all-rounder. Otherwise, it's best we leave it the way it is. And come to think of it, we all know that the governors basically control the state assemblies. And this proposal will pass through the state assemblies. It has to get their assent before it becomes law. And we know that that is not going to happen. So at the end of the day, this will pretty much be an exercise in futility.
And talk to me about the incremental versus the comprehensive approach that we usually see. Usually we see the Constitution being tweaked here and there. We don't see a lot of provisions of the Constitution being taken out in circulation. I mean, look at what we're trying to do with the local government autonomy thing. And you still have the joint account as a part of the Constitution, right? Talk to me about what that means, especially for someone who has to, deal with the interpretation in the courts of law, right? Does this make our systems better? What does these approaches, do to the system?
Yeah. So one of our major challenges in Nigeria is we are not able to monitor and evaluate the progresses of the implementation of our laws and make relevant amendments or adjustments over time to suit current or dynamic realities of our society. As far as I can remember, one of the few laws that enjoys consistent monitoring is the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. The Act created a monitoring committee which monitors its implementation. And that is why it's not surprising that 10 years after its enactment, the law is likely going to be amended based on the experiences of the past 10 years. Now, that is what you will expect with our laws generally, but unfortunately, that is not the case. And, surprisingly, you talked about the local government autonomy for which the Supreme Court has given a judgment. You will expect that we will see an amendment in that regard, right? I actually hope that is done as well, because if it's not done, it will be a huge oversight.
A huge gap. And these are some of the low-hanging fruits, because when it comes to dealing with the governance process in trying to actualize local government administration, one would have thought that this would be the right step forward, because that has been the argument of the governors. They say, listen, you're going about it the wrong way. How about you fix the Constitution, what the Constitution actually says, because that is the ground. Without the Constitution, everything else, goes through a very chaotic process. But talk to me about
just to correct that, not just the Constitution, the decisions of the Supreme Court are also laws in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Obviously, you have those judicial proclamations that or judgments that serve as interpretations that serve as the guide to some of these implementation. But my question to you about some of the bills that we've seen so far is also the head scratches of, for instance, state creation, right? No civilian or democratic administration in this country has ever successfully created a state before.
True.
Most of the states, all of the states that we have right now in the Federation were created by military regimes. We've seen a couple of them that are scaled second reading. What do we have in the Constitution that suggests that states can be created by the National Assembly? And are we heading towards uncharted territory here?
Uncharted territory? No. But will it be a successful journey? Most unlikely.
Why do you say that?
This is a matter of political interests. And when politics meets constitutionalism, one way or the other, one has to give way. In the context of this conversation, politics will most likely give way. I mean, look at how vast Nigeria is. Our interests are defined by largely religious, ethnic, regional, and other mundane considerations. These are the metrics that Nigerians will use to determine whether I deserve a state or whether you deserve a state. And everybody will be looking out for his interest at the end of the day. There's likely not going to be a consensus on that. This is not the first time that we are plying this route, and it will certainly not be the last. And we may likely not get to that destination.
How many times do these constitutional reviews look like an academic exercise? Because we've had several efforts since 1999 to date. Not many of them have amounted to much. I mean, there have been incremental changes here and there, but you would say that nothing comprehensive has, happened that would make Nigerians say, big change, right? And we're talking about the federalism that we need to practice in totality. We're talking about restructuring the government, and these are some of the attempts that the current National Assembly is trying to do. Give me a context of what Nigerians need to factor in terms of managing the expectations about what could actually happen at the end of the day.
Okay, so let me pick one issue, for example. Amongst the bills, there's a particular bill that seeks to confer on the Nigerian Bar Association the powers to sanction erring judicial officers. It sounded quite lofty. And when I tracked the conversations, Nigerians, quite a number of Nigerians were excited about it. They're like, yeah, this is it. Let's get it done. But in reality, is that practicable? The answer is no. The Nigerian Bar Association, it's a body of professionals, a body of lawyers. It's an association. Yes, it has distinguished itself in so many respects that it now enjoys statutory rights, obligations, and privileges. But it is not at the place where it can sanction judicial officers. It does not appoint judicial officers. It does not promote judicial officers. How will it sanction them? The NBA is a part of the National Judicial Council or the National Judicial Committees in the states. So there are quite a number of these proposals that may sound lofty. They may, it will rile up most Nigerians, but their practicality in the mechanization of government is somewhat impossible. But Nigerians are excited about it.
Yeah.
Or about them.
I mean, some people get their hopes up, and I suppose that's what we are leading towards, to say, listen, don't get too excited, because the reality is going to be quite different at the end of the day.
Completely.
But also, some of these proposals also make a lot of sense. Like this one, where they are talking about a proposal that will separate the offices of the Attorney General of the Federation and the Attorney General of the State from the offices of the Minister of Justice of the Federal Republic and the Commissioner of Justice of a state government. I mean, it doesn't sound like, it sounded like a no-brainer that there's, I mean, you shouldn't even debate this one. But talk to me about what in practice this can actually do. I mean, when one is the Attorney General and someone else is the Commissioner of Justice, I mean, what is the practicality in that?
It's quite practical. This is an argument that has been overflogged over the years. But this is what we have, is because this is what we have been practicing for many years. Having the Attorney General separate from the Minister of Justice will do quite a number of things. For example, the Minister of Justice is a political appointee of Mr. President. Political appointee of Mr. President, like every other minister. Again, serving as the Attorney General, he performs some sacred functions. He has some sacred powers. For example, the power to discontinue a matter in court. If anybody is being prosecuted, the Attorney General has the powers, constitutional powers, to withdraw that matter without any reason. It's his right. Yeah. Now, when that sacred and delicate power is mixed with politics, it can create some complications that the public, it will make the public to lose confidence in the system. So where you have an Attorney General that is not disciplined enough in the exercise of the powers of his office, that could create avoidable problems. So separating them could completely erode that possibility.
And you obviously have that type of setup in the United States, for instance, right? Where, I mean, for them, for the most part, there are elective positions, yes, right? Where you can become a district attorney or something like that. But here, if we end up separating them, doesn't then the Commissioner for Justice or Minister of Justice become the boss of the Attorney General of the Federation or the Attorney General of the state?
So it would depend on how the powers are streamlined. There are quite a number of issues that will come up by the time that proposal is taken. The mode of appointment, who performs oversight functions on that department, and quite a number of issues.
Yeah, okay. So currently, according to the Nigerian Constitution, one can be a citizen by birth, by registration, by naturalization, right? Yes. There is a bill that is currently being considered to alter the provisions of the Constitution to grant citizenship rights to spouses of women from Nigeria and specify the number of youths and women that may be appointed into a specific position. But on the idea of citizenship, granting citizenship to spouses of women from Nigeria, how dicey is that? Because it does sound like, you know, we're giving out citizenship, you know, willy-nilly.
So this to me sounds more like...
Because you lose it, I guess, if you are divorced. Or if, I reckon that if you're divorced,
yes,
that means you lose your citizenship, right?
I quite agree with that argument if it were to be taken, right? But I think the argument is hinged on some kind of a social inclusionary thing, right? As a man, if I marry a woman from Netherlands or anywhere in the UK, she automatically becomes a Nigerian. But as a woman, if you marry somebody else, you automatically become it does not accord the same right to the man who is a foreigner as it does to a woman who marries a Nigerian. You know, so that's some kind of a discriminatory practice.
I mean, we live in patriarchy, so I suppose that's where it's coming from.
You know, so I think these are just efforts to create a balance in the system.
If you have to score it, right? How many times we've tried some very lofty amendments in the past unsuccessfully? How would you rate it? The level of success when it comes to constitutional amendments?
So the level of success, it can be numerical, it can be measured in terms of its substance. Numerically, it's been low. But in terms of substance, I would say it has been not so good, but at least average. Average. The problem that we have is most of the amendments that go through are those that the powers that be are interested in. For example, the portion of the Constitution that was amended to streamline the rights of a president who becomes a president after the death, who was a vice president and becomes a president after the death of the president. You know, the current position is that he cannot go for 2 terms after acting as a president in the first instance.
So if he completes a term, it also counts against him?
It completes a term, it counts against him. Once he goes the second time, that's it. And that arose from the experience that we had between Yar'Adua and Goodluck Jonathan, President Goodluck Jonathan. You know, so something like that, quickly, they sorted it out. But before then, there are quite a number of issues that were constitutional issues that were pending and yearning for amendments that were not considered, you know, let alone being approved.
So, I mean, this is a work in progress, just like the law. It's always a work in progress. 10 years down the line, the laws that we think are seemingly perfect today, we could look back and say, we don't think this is going to work for our society, and it's time for us to make some amendments, right? Talk to me about, you know, how the National Assembly, because we do have a bicameral legislature, right? The House of Reps has been leading the news with all of the passages so far and so forth. They obviously need concurrence from the Senate. Before we can agree on the best step forward. But give me a sense of the motivation behind some of these bills, some of these amendments, some of these reviews, and how homegrown some of these ideas are. Because just like the one-day general election thing, you heard what the people said about it. it's almost as if Nigerians are waking up and realizing that we're not necessarily in touch with the people who are supposed to be speaking for us, right? You know, how many professionals did they talk to before they, agreed to sponsor that particular bill? What were the engagements like? What were the town hall conversations? I know we have the public hearing as part of the processes and procedures, but that usually comes almost halfway through the finish, right? Give me a sense of how some of these ideas make it to the National Assembly without the seeming inclusion of the larger part of our society.
Yeah, so, you know, we, in Nigeria, we practice indirect democracy. That's why we have representatives in the National Assembly and in the state assemblies. And ordinary practice, legislative practice, requires that our representatives will liaise with us in the process of coming up with ideas, suggestions, proposals to move the country forward. But there has been a growing disconnect between the people and their representatives. The people appear not to know what their rights are. These days, we measure legislatures by the number of motorcycles they share, the number of sewing machines they share, but those are not their fundamental duties. Their fundamental obligations are making of laws, holding the executive accountable, and performing oversight functions. In the process of lawmaking, the lawmakers, their only interaction with the people is when they are doling out something to them, or when they're expecting something from the people in terms of vote, support, and all that. There's hardly any forum where any member or senator has that they interface with the people. Some of them have email addresses that hardly work, right? They say the public can reach out to them through this means, but they hardly work. You know, if they will be able to breach some of these gaps, they are likely to get good feedback from the people. So, talking about some of the bills, I think that two issues. One of it is some of these amendments were brought by some members who feel, oh, I haven't sponsored any bill, motion, or something like that. If we're doing a stock taking of legislative efforts, I will have nothing. So just bring up something and push it forward. Whatever it is, let them deal with it. Right?
It doesn't have to see the light of day.
You know, it doesn't. It's just for the fun of it or something like that. And then you have those who are quite passionate about real issues, but they are not able to articulate them very well. I'll still refer back to the bill that seeks to confer on the NBA the powers to sanction judicial officers. If you look at the bill critically, it is born out of a desire for judicial reforms, right? You want judicial officers who have erred to be duly sanctioned, but the approach suggested or proposed clearly is not in order with what is expected, right? So you will expect that, okay, measures will be put in place to strengthen the NJC in the process of appointment, particularly appointment of judy, because that is where the issue starts before you get to discipline.
And over time, people have, also questioned whether the NJC is enjoying too much monopoly over policing the Nigerian judiciary, because sometimes, it leaves much to be desired. But for want of time, I'm going to ask you this question around, we've seen so many instances where the Constitution has been tested in terms of its interpretation, in terms of the latitude, in terms of what is in black and white, and whether it aligns with the spirit of the law when it's been executed. Case in point, what happened in Rivers with the state of emergency, and people read Section 305 and say, listen, well, it states clearly that the president may impose a state of emergency, but where does it say the president can suspend a democratically elected governor or a state legislature for that matter? Are these some of these areas that you expect the National Assembly to to be very clear, because sometimes the provisions of the law looks too ambiguous to a point where you can make arguments for and against it, and you could be right.
So, you know, I was watching a video recently of someone who says that the Nigerian system is such that whenever a president is elected, the constitution and the laws in the country begin to smell like him. You know, they assume the shape of Mr. President. The case in Rivers kind of reinforce that belief, right? So take, for example, you don't even have to seek clarity in gray areas. There are provisions that are explicit. 2/3 majority of members present, or Senate members, you know, senators present. How do you arrive to 2/3 majority by voice vote? Most Nigerians have questioned that. You arrive to 2/3 majority is a number. So you count the numbers, but we saw how all that played out. And, you know, the issue is that all these things are diminishing the confidence of Nigerians in the system.
Right. And as always, a work in progress. That is the consoling sentence that always accompanies these conversations, that it is all just a work in progress. Barrister Bulus Asten, thank you so much for providing us with some context to this developing issue. It's still early days, second reading, there's still a long way to go. Perhaps we would circle back in due time to take a look at the level of progress made so far. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me
on the program. All right.